Nimbula, nakanasema mai. Nimbula Vinaka, nakana parang tiko mo Australia, Manisilandi. Isa Vinaka vakalevu sara veke menina veiwakany na nomuni sema tiko maina yakavy nakanisigany koa klasa vimamatsiko na walo na ngonongo maiviti ngosa vimamatiko na Timi na mbongi nisinga vakarogoca na nonda vulani ni koa sema saritsiko me Australia satu kuna kwa via ni si vimamatiko na ono na yakavy ni singatambo mai Australia. Yo kilata ngani vunga veke muni ni sarangita tiko na Timi ni lea vitu ni Timi ni viti eratou ngita chungo mai Australia. Anda maro sara ni anda sema tiko ni kuwa wana nanda vulani ka sulit chiko na ngona me mai dona nona itavi weekend na signi kuwa. Anda babi ni Vinaka tiko ni vulango na vulo tune na vule were nonta sarchungan sana o LOMAIVITI. Anda maro taka na Veitalanoa sige utingango be Professor Unaisi na Mbombombamba, Selina Kurleva o Samson Boma, batake Master Kali Bunindilo na nodratou maiviu si taka tiko na veulu tanga lelevu mai dhau rakitiko na vulongo na bukunda saranga na wekanda sana o LOMAIVITI Vinaka vakalevu vera keda na mai vulani tiko ni bata-batango totoka na nanda veiwase nanda vakaitalanoa na nanda mai vitoko ni takatiko na sasanga ni nanda rei leso na ngono makau maiviti wakatalangaki na ngonongo ni COVID-19 kadiwa ni lako tiko ngona na tubi mate yata tiko ngona nanda LOMAIVITI ia sega ni baka lelitakan na nonda talitakan menda maindame bata kanda me Veitalanoa ia vunga veke muni o nia sarang ngoti tiko na nongwa talanoa taki Moturiki da vavi ni Vinaka sara vakalevu ve isoka lomera vakatalangaki na maramanganendra o suliana kalomera si watimbau na nonroang ole mai me keto me Veitalanoa nongwa bata-bata me baleti Moturiki sanga lako tiko na italanoa ni levu tiko na italanoa makawa tiko na yamne nongo Moturiki ia endona turanga sandole kabo ko na vakadidike na hunga sara na LOMAIVITI ia ndakalunga teni ala ko talanga ko na yamne nongo Moturiki na ngonongo menda sara vakambula sara menda nondo vula ini ko Professor Patrick Nunn isa ni mbula Vinaka Professor Patrick Nunn
ni mbula Vinaka mbulo tarisi
So Vinaka, thank you so much for taking the time away from your busy schedule in at the Sunshine Coast in Australia.
Sang
Uh,
Lengan, singa tambungo.
Sabi nakawalew.
Mm-mm.
May marota kasara. Ye mete ko butak nga na nandaro Veitalanoa. E na buku ni numungole mai na nungui bata-bata. Kira nga niyo pamatalti kimuni nga siya. Tapa ako ti ko kimuni mai ngilandi. Mongole sar may biti. Ito nga nung Veitalanoa lekalek.
Well, I came to Fiji in 1985, and I stayed there for 25 years. And I today I would much rather be in Fiji than in Australia. I think when you spend half of your life in one place, then it becomes part of you. And when I went to Fiji, I thought I would stay for 3 years, and then I left England. But I stayed for 25 years, and I don't regret that for one moment. You know, I think, Tarisi, ni vosotros sarau vosva palangi, beletau vosva viti vakan vakoroe, asingna vosva viti vakandondono. So please forgive me. I will speak English to you most of the time.
Kurilanga.
But one day we sit down with a bowl of grog, then we'll vosva viti. But
Doon saranga.
I I think I was very lucky to come to Fiji because it taught me that there is another way to look at the world. And I think that's very important, that so many people I meet, I live in a Kepalangi, they look at the world in one way. They think there is no other way to see the world. And I think coming to Fiji and meeting Fiji people and understanding the way that they thought, um, it opened my mind in a way that it would never have been opened if I had stayed in England or if I had come to Australia or somewhere like that. So I feel very privileged to have lived in Fiji and become immersed in the cultures of Fiji in the way that I have. But I came from a very humble background. I was the first person in my family ever to go to university. We were not a rich family, and but we were a happy family. So.
Sa totoo. Pinakabalib sa Professor Patrick Nunn wasya may nanomu italanoa connecting you back to England and your appreciation of Fiji. Thank you so much for all the amazing things you've done for us, not only for Fiji but also in many other countries in the Pacific. In terms of your research. The other question I was wanting to ask you, what was something that encouraged you to go down the pathway of, geography, geology, and archaeology? Was that something that kind of interested you when you were young to go down that pathway, Dr. Patrick?
Yeah. My mother was a geography teacher, and she encouraged my interest in geography, I suppose. And when I went to university, I wanted to do geography and mathematics because they were my two best subjects. But that year they didn't offer mathematics, so I had to do geography and geology. And so I became very interested in geology. And when I went to Fiji, I was I was teaching at the University of the South Pacific, and most of the geography that we were teaching was the geography of New Zealand or the geography of South America or the geography of any other place but not the Pacific Islands. And that made me think we need to teach Pacific people about the Pacific, not about other places. And I think that's still something that is very important. So many Pacific people, when they get educated overseas, they learn about other places, but they don't deepen their understanding of their own history or geography or other things like that. So I, I, I wrote a number of books about the Pacific and about the geology and the geography of the Pacific. And I think that helped to some extent.
So wow, that's amazing. And yeah, just acknowledging your mom, that's just amazing to have her influence someone, and now it's you helping many of us. And I just have to let you know that there's a lot of your students logging in online, and they all saying bula to you.
Really? Mbulakeve.
Bulakere,
Good to
bulakere.
see you all. Good to see you all again.
Yes, to all of you who went to USP and those who remembered Professor Patrick Nunn. So Vinaka vakalevu for stopping by and to listen to Italanoa. So on the side, Professor Patrick, when I announced to everybody that you were going to come on my platform, there was huge excitement because a lot of them were like, then they hear your voice again. So many of us will remember your voice in the lecture theaters, especially those of us who took geography from you. For inspiring many of us so that we can be in the fields that we are right now.
But Tarisi, I was also inspired. I used to see a lot of Kaipalangi coming to USP to lecture, and they never became interested or curious about Pacific cultures. But I did. And I think part of it was because we used to take field trips, the first year physical geography. The first few years I was there, we would go up to Wainimala. We would stay in Matanasau, Koro, and then, later on in other places up there. And then after the 2000 coup, then we started going to Nandronga, and we would stay in some of the koros there. But, just mixing with my students and understanding what they thought of the world and what they wanted really helped to educate me as well. And I think that's, for people that don't get that experience from a place like USP, it's a wasted opportunity. Yeah.
I remember going to Matenasau and also visiting Sawende and going up the Tatuba cave.
That's right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really important for students to not only learn in the classroom, but what you did, Professor Patrick, you allowed even Fijian students like me, to really appreciate the Waimanu River, the Wainimala River, going up into the mountains and staying with families, even in the Matainasau village. It was such an eye-opening experience for many of us.
Yeah.
It's a wasted opportunity for them to connect with the students and get to appreciate their islands. Now you started to work with our Fiji Museum team, which we really appreciate. There was a really good collaboration work that was happening between the University of the South Pacific and the Fiji Museum. And you've taken many of us, to different parts of Fiji. But today we are going to focus on Moturiki, which is something that a lot of our LOMAIVITI audience are looking for to hear from you in terms of your research on Moturiki and the surrounding islands. Would you like to tell us as to why you chose Moturiki as a place of interest, and what were some of the findings, key findings that added to our understanding of Fiji's prehistory?
Can I take a step backwards and just say that I'm not an archaeologist? You are an archaeologist, but I'm not. I pretend to be an archaeologist. And the reason that I got interested in archaeology was because the Fiji Museum came to me at USP and they said, we are fed up with all these overseas archaeologists coming into Fiji and the other Pacific islands. doing all this research, taking all this material away, and we never hear from them again. And I think that's a really important point, is that the Pacific Islands, and you know this very well, have almost been like the plaything of a lot of overseas archaeologists. Not all of them, but a lot of them. You know, it's been a topic that they have chalked up on their CV, and they've said, oh yes, we've done this work there and this work there. But I have been to so many places in Fiji where people have told me, oh, you know, some years ago, these archaeologists came, they dug holes here and they did all this, and we don't know what they were doing. A very good example is in Nandronga, Nangwara I Hoho, the Garioso. And, you know, when I went there to Tau Koro, that people there were telling me, you know, all these people came, they dug these holes up there. Alevna Kaipalangi, the archaeologists, we don't know what they were doing. And I think that's disgraceful. I think it's disgraceful that that information is not given back to people. But I see that a lot with many, not all, but many overseas archaeologists working in the Pacific. And you and I have talked about this before, you know, about how it's important not just to give information back to the people of the islands, but also to involve them in your research. This is not, you know, this is not secret research. You know, this is Pacific history. It's your history. And I think if I'm to share in it, then, you know, you have an ethical responsibility to give something back. Moturiki. Moturiki means small island. There's a few Moturikis in Fiji. There's one off Benga, but the big Moturiki in LOMAIVITI is the one that you've asked me to talk about. The great thing about being an archaeologist in Suva is that, you know, every weekend you can go somewhere different, and if you've got the time, and you can go and look for interesting things. And that's really how I first got to Moturiki and Ovalau. I had the chance to go out there and see the island, and I liked it, and so went back there a second time. And we had a look at a place, Savuna is the northernmost koro in Moturiki. And we walked along the shoreline there looking for pottery, na kuraniviti makawa I loma na nuku, inside the beach sand. And at a place called Solevu, we actually found some decorated lapita pottery. And we said, well, this is the oldest pottery that you can find anywhere in Fiji. So we thought it's good to come back and do a proper survey of Moturiki. So with the Fiji Museum, with my old friend, Sepeti Matararamba, who I have to say has probably taught me more about Fiji archaeology and Fiji history than anyone else, including you, Teresi. He's a remarkable man, and he's been a friend of mine for more than 25 years now, and I owe him a lot. Anyhow, look, we went to Moturiki, we went to Nanyumbasanga and made our sevu to Ratomai Moturiki, and we had permission then to basically walk around the whole island of Moturiki to look for any kind of indication that there might have been ancient settlement on Moturiki. And we did look at Solevu, but we also went to the south of Moturiki and in between the koro of Daku and Duluimbao, and Dunambaravi called, there's one beach there called Netambale, also known as Naturuku. And at Natambale, we found at the mouth of the river, Mataloaloa, at the mouth of the river, we found lots of, not lots, maybe about 10 pieces of lapita pottery. And we figured that they had been washed down the river from inside the island somewhere. So we walked up the river, the Mataloaloa, and we found the site of this lapita pottery. It was basically an area of sand inside the forest, and it was covered with fragments of this very, very old pottery. So some of it was very beautifully decorated. It's all in the Fiji Museum now. Actually, there's some in the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, but most of it's in the Fiji Museum now, and beautifully decorated pottery. So we decided to come back and excavate properly. We sought the permission of the people of Uluimbao, and that permission was given to us. And so I came back with a team of researchers from USP and the Fiji Museum, and we all Pacific Islanders, and we dug there for 3 weeks. And Tarisi, I tell you, it was perhaps the wettest 3 weeks that I've ever experienced in Fiji. Veisinga every single day, uda vakalevu. But we had our tarpaulins up over the pits, so we were dry underneath. But I always remember it was a very wet 3 weeks that we spent there excavating Natambale, and we found a lot of lapita pottery there, and the ages that we got on the pottery, you can't date the pottery directly, but you can date the shells that are associated with it. So we have dates there that probably go back to about, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. I've got it up on my screen here, but the dates go back to probably about 800 BC. So 800 years before the birth of Christ, but maybe even further than that. When you do radiocarbon dating on shells, there's always a margin of error. And so those dates could be as early as 1200 BC, but they're probably around 800 BC. So that tells us that the first people to come to Moturiki arrived there at least 800 years before the birth of Christ. And of course, the very interesting thing about the Natambale site on Moturiki is that we discovered a complete burial, a complete human burial about 2 meters down below the surface. And this was a lapita aged burial. There was lots of lapita pottery around it. It was the skeleton of a woman who had lived to be about 50 years old. She had very well developed shoulder bones, and we think that may be because she had spent a lot of time rowing or pulling oars or something like that, which had built up her shoulder muscles. And we don't think it was just her. We think it was probably everyone at that time that did a lot of rowing or manual work that had built up the shoulder muscles. She also had not very good teeth, as you would expect of someone who was living nearly 3,000 years ago, anywhere in the world. But what was interesting about her teeth was that they were stained yellow. And again, the scientists that I worked with believe that it's possible that staining came from the chewing of kava roots. So Vinaka, before we learned how to pound the grog with in a tambuli, people in Fiji used to chew the kava and spit the residue into a bowl, and that was how the drink was made. And we think even before that, people didn't drink kava, they just chewed the kava roots. And it was a way of keeping yourself awake, particularly on long sea journeys, so that you didn't, you could stay awake for 2 or 3 days at a time, which was probably the most effective way to complete those journeys. So we think that this lady we found on Moturiki may have also chewed kava, and that's something that still happens, as you know, in Vanuatu and elsewhere. We, the student of mine who discovered this skeleton was allowed to give her a name, and the name he chose, he's a Solomon Island student named Chris Suri. The name he chose was Mana, which is a very good name, in Pacific terms for, for a person like that. So the skeleton of Mana was a major discovery. And obviously, before we did anything else, we asked the people of Uluimbao, we explained to them what we'd found, and we asked their permission to excavate it and take it back to USP to do some tests. And they said yes, but the agreement was that you then bring it back one day to Natambale and bury it at Natambale. And the skeleton of Mana, we did take it back to Suva, and some of the bones went to Japan, but all the bones came back, and I went with Rosalind Kumar, my long-term collaborator, and we took the bones back to Uluimbao about 18 months after the excavations, and they were reburied in a coffin in a very nice ceremony at Natambale. And they built a cairn, a mound over the burial site. So we fulfilled our part of the bargain. But what we did do was to determine the age of Mana, and we determined that she was living around about 800 BC, 800 years before the birth of Christ, at the Natambale site there on Moturiki. We also analyzed some of her bones to see what kinds of food she ate. And as you would expect, she ate mostly marine foods, but also some land foods, lots of green vegetables and maybe uvi, maybe taro. We're not quite sure, but mostly a marine diet.
Yes, Vinaka vakalevu sara na nomuase mai na itukutukungo. There's a lot of our friends who are connecting in today, wanting to hear this story. And I know many of them have been following the work that you have done with the team at the Fiji Museum. And it's really amazing that, that you have, like as you said, you've kept your side of the bargain by doing all the analysis and returning as you have agreed with the people of Uluimbao to return the remains to go back to where it was. So Vinaka vakalevu, Professor Patrick, for doing this very important research, and I think this is critical for our Itoke people to acknowledge and also to support this kind of work. What would be kind of like your advice, or maybe sort of like an empowering message you would give to the young ones of Moturiki in terms of learning from the experience of these excavations and the knowledge that you have, or maybe we all have acquired through the work of your team? What would you like to share to
them? In many places, we produce materials or we write articles in the Fiji Times that inform people throughout Fiji about what we've been doing. Now, we didn't do that for Moturiki, but we have done that for Borewa. So we have produced color posters for about the Borewa excavations in Nandranga. Vapalangi, Vambao, Hindi. We've also been doing a lot of work over the last few years in Bua, in Vanualevu, looking at the Koronivalu there. So looking at the ancient hill forts of Bua. And in 2019, I took a whole set of posters back to the Torangana Tuimbua and gave them to him in person. So Vapalangi, Vambao, Vambua, Vahindi. So four different languages. And we asked, if they could be put up in the schools and things like that. And these are also available online. So people can access those posters online. The Fiji Museum has copies. The Ministry of Education has copies. The Ministry of Italanoa Affairs has copies, and so on. My advice is for everyone in Fiji to take an interest in this kind of thing, because this is your history and it doesn't belong to outsiders. Outsiders are people who are helping throw a light on this history, but they're not the owners of this history. And I think that's a very important thing to understand. When I go and visit the Koro, people often say to me, "Oh, tell us the history of Fiji." And I say, "Well, what do you tell me the history of Fiji?" And they talk to me about Lieutenant Sombo Sombo and the Kaunitoni, and they talk about the landing at Vunda. And I say, that's fine. That is your version of history, and I respect that. But if you ask me, I will tell you a different story. And I will tell you that the first people in Fiji came to Nandranga. They probably settled at Borewa and at nearby Ngongo. And this happened about 3,100 years ago. So more than 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. We've never found scientific evidence of an early landing at Vunda or anywhere in the Vunda area. But that doesn't make me right and them wrong. And I think this is very important. There are different ways to look at history. And I will never tell anyone in Fiji or in the Pacific, your version of history is wrong and my version is right. I can use my scientific training to explain what I understand to be the history of Fiji, but I'm not insisting that is the right history. And there can be more than one history. Does that make sense?
Dina saranga, toto kasaranga, dina todoko, Professor Paddy, especially we kituna itoke, niti ko na italanoa mbeleti luto na somba listali na kauvanra. So there's a lot of that understanding within our own communities, and then when our scientific, archaeological, anthropology studies that come in, I support what you say in terms of we adding value to the existing knowledge base.
Gina. And Can I give you one more example?
Dun.
So with the Fiji Museum, we've been working in Kondavu, not in Matanuku, but we've been working in Kondavu, collecting stories about the last eruption of the volcano of Nambukulevu. And the scientific evidence says that this volcano last erupted about 2,000 years ago, about 2,000, maybe 2,300 years ago. Nambukulevu last erupted. Now, I've been working on Ono Island in Nakasaleka, and lots of people on Ono Island have stories about Tanovo and Tautomalau and how the two gods fought each other, and this is how the eruption happened, and so on and so on. And so we've got versions of that story from Ono. Kaliopate Tavola has been very helpful and has provided much of a story from Dravuni. And then we've been collecting stories from other places on Kondavu. So we've got stories from Nambukulevu Ira, we've got stories from Ravitaki, we've got stories from Tavuki, and 4 or 5 other places. And it's really interesting how well those stories are preserved. And, you know, if I tell this to an audience of Europeans and I say these are oral traditions that have been preserved for 2,300 years, they all go, oh, wow. But if I tell it to Ertomaina Koro and Kondavu, they all say, yeah, we know. These stories, we know they're that old. Lenga, it's not, it's not a surprise to us. Eh? And I think that's very interesting that people in Fiji do understand something about the depth of their historical understanding, which outsiders often find surprising. So I suppose, Tarisi, my other message would be proud of your traditional knowledge. It's not worthless. It's not without value. It does have value, and preserve it. So don't lose it. I think it's hugely important.
Vinaka vakalevu numutuko na mengori. Professor Patrick, just the previous session that we were having before this, where Professor Una Nabombo was part of, we also had Samson Verma, who was also a student of USP, who is now living in Rome. And he was also reiterating to our listeners exactly that point, in terms of us valuing our own, indigenous knowledge, and for us to share this knowledge amongst ourselves. So your sharing just now, it just confirms that message. So woohoo, Vinaka vakalevu. So our people of LOMAIVITI who are listening in, not only LOMAIVITI, but the 14 provinces that will be listening to Veitalanoa, will be reminded about what you just said. Let us be proud of our traditional or indigenous knowledge, and knowing the value and the worth that it has for us to continue to pass it on to the next generation. Wow, the talk. Vinaka vakalevu, Professor Patrick Betarong. One thing I really like was, one, you're working with Kaliopati Tavola, and it's really heartwarming, that you're working with our indigenous knowledge holders. How did that come about for you to be able to meet with different individuals in different yasana for you to work with?
In different ways, Tarisi, but I suppose the main way was Sepeti Matararamba. I was so fortunate to work alongside him for so long. And everywhere that we went together in Fiji, which must be about 30 different places, he was able to command respect. He was able to bring me along, if you like, and allow me some of that respect as well. So I think I was very fortunate in that sense. And then since Mata, as you know, I've been involved with many other people at the museum. So I've worked for a long time with Elia Nakoro, who's the current head of archaeology there, and Elia is one of my former students. Marioni Tamaila Kamba is one of my ex-students. I'm also working quite closely at the moment with Meli Nanuku, who's the oral history specialist there. And, I think the Fiji Museum is one of the most valuable organizations in Fiji, because if it wasn't there, I don't know who would be doing the kind of research that they are doing. And the Fiji Museum itself is such a marvelous place, as you know very well. And there is so much material there. And I think that everyone in Fiji can really get a sense of where they have come from by engaging with the Fiji Museum more than perhaps they have done so in the past. Yeah.
Yes, Vinaka vakalevu. And I'm just so blessed that I had the chance to invite Meroni, Ramela
I heard
Kemba
that.
to. Yeah, so it was really, wonderful for her to come on the platform, and also her acknowledging, the support that you give to her to enable her, and also Elia and all these amazing students that have come through your classroom. So Vinaka vakalevu. Professor Paddy, for influencing a lot of our young Fijians and getting our indigenous young researchers to be able to do the work, and which is like what you were saying before. Sometimes we have outside researchers coming in, taking the information and going and never sharing what they're supposed to be sharing back home. Now coming back to Moturiki, when you were doing your research on the island, because I know that there's other islands, nearby. You've got Dangalai and Leleuvia, but also there's a space that is, like a body of water that I was sharing with our audience yesterday, which I know that you included in one of your books. And that is connected to Burotokula. Yeah, would you be able just to share a little bit of that? Because that is something that is always intriguing. Out of reading your book, I remember you gave me one of your book. That was a space, the pages that I go back to a lot, talking about the geology and the movements of islands, islands that come up above the water and islands that go below the water. Can you just share something about that?
Of course. So I think the place you're talking about is Veitalanoa. Veitalanoa. And I can't remember if it's between Leleuvia and Dangalai or if it's on the side. But there is a tradition in Moturiki, especially in Uluimbao, Ndaku, and Nanyumbasanga, that there used to be an island there. And the island was not Burotokula, it was Vuniivilevu. And that was an island that existed there. And one day that island sank below the ocean surface. And I became really interested in these kinds of stories because as a geologist, my first thought was islands can't disappear. But we have similar stories from Fiji, including the stories about Burotokula, but also from Vanuatu and Solomon Islands and Micronesia. We have a lot of stories about islands that once slipped beneath the ocean surface. And so I became very interested in the story of Vuniivilevu. And to the best of my understanding, we think that there was an island there up until about 800 years ago. And that one day there was an earthquake and that island slipped off the edge of the Veitalanoa shelf, the underwater shelf, and went beneath the ocean surface. And in oral cultures, so where people keep their memories in their heads, stories about disappearing islands are very memorable. so people tend to pass that story on from one generation to the next. And I think it's the same with the story of Borotu or Borotu Kula. And there are other stories like that. There's a place called Moon Reef, I think it's Makalati, off the Tailevu coast, where also an island once is said to have disappeared. And there's also an island off the west coast of Ngao called Nukuloa, opposite the village of Nukuloa, that also disappeared. So there are many stories like this around. And, again, I think geologists tend to dismiss these kinds of stories, but I think there's a lot of reason to take them very seriously. I don't see why anyone would invent a story about a vanished island called Veitalanoa off the south coast of Moturiki. So, yeah, and the story is today that whenever you cross that place where cross the vakalevu or the Veitalanoa, I'm sorry, can't remember what the name is there. You need to take off your hat. You need to keep quiet. Otherwise, your boat will not be able to proceed. And one day we were coming back from Uluimbao in 2 boats from USP back to Suva. And the boat I was in, we all took our hats off and we were really quiet, and we went straight back to Suva, no problem. But the other boat, there was a woman in there. I won't tell you her name, but she had been drinking and she was drunk and she was singing and really loud when they crossed the Veitalanoa. And that boat's engine, it was a USP boat, that boat's engine broke down and they drifted in that area for about 6 or 7 hours. And finally someone had to come and tow them back to USP. And the engineer on board the boat couldn't understand what had happened to the motor. And, again, I hear so many stories like that, not just in Fiji, but throughout the Pacific, that I really do believe there's something in them. It's so easy to dismiss them. But when you hear these stories and you think, well, what happened is exactly what people said would happen if you behave like that. So I find that absolutely fascinating, Tarisi.
Vinaka vakalevu. Because when I was sharing this story yesterday, because I was kind of like to warm them up for today, I was like, oh, there's a story, and I was surprised that the viewership just increased, just went up when they were wanting to know so much more. So I just gave a little bit information, but what I was really moved by what happened last night, Professor Paddy, was the response from the audience. And that was the one thing you just mentioned about us valuing our own stories. I was, Mr. Bunindilo had to tell me, sambat do talengo, salah kumai sabalavu, au samarau baleta, because if we don't create this space for these kinds of talanoa, many talanoa will remain in people's heads and they will never be shared.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah,
so have I got time to tell you one more story from Moturiki?
Yes. Okay.
So, Vinaka Kali. Okay, so this is research that was done on the Lapita pottery itself. So if you take a small slice off the pottery and then you look at it under a microscope, you can see the minerals that it's made up from. And what we found, and I should say this is Rosalind Kumar, who is Fijian, and she did her Masters of Science at USP on the mineralogy of the Lapita pottery from Moturiki. And what she found was that 70% of the Lapita pottery we found at Natambale was made at Natambale, because the minerals in the pottery were the same as the minerals in the rocks around there. But 30% contained minerals that are not found on Moturiki. So she traced about 10% of that to Lao, probably to Lakemba Nayao. She traced 10% of that to the Rewa Delta, and she traced 10% of that to somewhere in Kundavu. So from looking, and she's just published this work, so from looking at the mineral composition of the ancient pottery on Moturiki, we were able to reconstruct the trading network between the people of Natambale 3,000 years ago, and we know they had a trading network that involved central Lao, that involved Kundavu, and that involved somewhere in the Rewa Delta. So again, science can give us insights into ancient history in Fiji and elsewhere that we can perhaps get from the history, from the oral histories, but it's unlikely because it's so long ago. So again, there's a lot of this kind of thing going on, and if I'll send you a copy of that article so you can share it with anyone that you like. But it's a very neat study.
Sa totoka waka o te rerea. Da rerea ni ro veise mai Vinaka, ro waka mau, or connected really well in terms of science and oral history.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Totoka saranga, da rerea 10%, 70% on Moturiki. So from the 30, tini la koe Lakemba, se Nayau, tini la koe Rewa, tini la koe Kandau.
Yes. And the interesting thing, Tarisi, is that we don't know of any Lapita site on Kundavu. We don't know of any Lapita site in the Rewa Delta. But there must have been Lapita settlements there 3,000 years ago, because otherwise you wouldn't have the pottery there.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing, which also confirms with the 70% if they're from Moturiki, which means that the women of Moturiki were potters, right? Or
yes,
the ones that were there.
Of course, yes. But that's true of everywhere in Fiji. A lot of places don't make pottery today, but in the past they did, because the beaches are covered with the Moturiki makawa. So, yeah.
Wow. See, for our audience that are listening in, this is an amazing discussion and an empowering one as well to encourage many of us listening in to start doing our own research. Like at the moment, the only two places we know that are doing active pottery making are Nanronga and Rewa. But I know in Kandavu, the district of Yahweh, where I'm from, my grandmother's line, they used to do pottery. But now I heard, I think a couple of days ago, someone messaged me and said that they're continuing the revival of the pottery making on Kandavu, especially towards the vakalevu side. So, wow, Vinaka vakalevu for, shedding some light, in that area for the pottery. Would you like to share additional information, if you would like to share with us of any other information about mana or any interesting findings?
Well, about mana, we were able, with the help of some Japanese scientists, to reconstruct the head of mana. And, that's been done in a lot of places, but it had never been done before in Fiji or anywhere else in the Pacific Islands. So we were able to see what the face of the first person, or the first preserved person in Fiji actually looked like. And the head is in the Fiji Museum. I don't know if it's on display, but the head is the reconstructed head is there. It was very interesting. The head, many people said the head looked Polynesian rather than Melanesian, but I don't think so. I think that, as you know very well, the divide between Polynesia and Melanesia is not really a divide at all. It's a continuum. So the head or the face looked a lot like a Pacific Islander. The one mistake that I think we made with the head was to give it hair, and because the skull itself doesn't give you any clue as to what the hair would have been, whether it would have been curly or whether it would have been straight. But then the danger is you produce a head without any hair, and people say, well, the Lapita people were bald, they didn't have any hair, and that wouldn't have been true. So we put straight hair on. Not me, but the Japanese team put straight hair on, and many people have said, well, you don't know that, and maybe she had curly hair, and maybe she did. But that's the dilemma sometimes when you're trying to reconstruct the past. There are key things that you cannot know. We cannot know the color of her skin. We cannot know, what kind of hair she had. We cannot know these things. But then if you can't pretend that they didn't exist or they weren't part of her. So it's a bit of a dilemma. But look, the Fiji Museum has the reconstructed head, and it does give the face of the first known Fijian.
Vinaka vakalevu, Professor Patrick Nunn, for the amazing work that you do in terms of researching for many of us in the Pacific, but mainly in this case of Moturiki, that the reconstruction of mana has never been done, as far as I know, for Fiji. So it's really acknowledging, your team and also our people of Moturiki. That the children of Moturiki has something to be proud of, that through this research or the reconstruction work in Japan and all this analysis that are being done, and Moturiki is now kind of like the best example that we could use, to enlighten other places in Fiji, and especially the connection to Borewa and to a few other places that you've been to, Professor Patrick. Vinaka vakalevu, for helping us on that one. So now we've talked about pottery, and we've talked about mana and the human remains that were found on Moturiki. What other interesting materials that your team was able to find on Moturiki?
Well, I don't think there's a lot. I mean, we found stone tools, and we found lots of shellfish that people had been eating. The burial of Mana was very interesting. She had 3 large trochus shells on each side of her head. So we think that maybe we think that maybe Mana was a high status person. Yes. And that she was buried in a very ceremonial way. It was very interesting because the head of the skull of Mana, when we discovered it, was upright, and the rest of her body was horizontal. And we think that may be because she was buried with a big headdress, and over time that headdress disappeared. But the skull remained upright. So we think she was a high status person. And that in itself is very interesting because we don't know anything about the gendered nature of chieftainship in the past of the Pacific. A lot of Australian researchers in the Pacific get very worked up about gender and gender roles and gender equity, and that's fine. But we really don't know, before contact or before Christianity, we really don't know that there were male chiefs or female chiefs or male and female chiefs. We just don't have that kind of information. And it's a very small sample of one, but it does seem that Mana was a chiefly person, She's the only burial we found at that site. So it may be that she was the leader of the people who lived at Moturiki at that time.
Wow, yes, Vinaka, vakalevu, for sharing those other interesting and extra information for our listeners to appreciate, in terms of our archaeological work in Fiji and in the Pacific. Definitely, we have stone tools, and we have shells, and definitely, of course, pottery. Again, evidence of what it was used in the past. And in this case, for Moturiki, that was amazing that you were able to find a burial and connected to someone that now we have a name attached to it. And now, do you have any other plans you have for Moturiki or post-COVID? What are your plans, Professor Paddy, for Fiji?
Well, can I just say to everyone in Fiji, please get vaccinated. Okay, it's a really good thing to get vaccinated, and it's the only way that Fiji is going to open to the rest of the world again. And in terms of the future, I would like to do more research in Kondavu. I've really enjoyed working on the Koronivalu of Nakasaleka, and I think Kondavu is an under-researched island, and in addition to Tarisi, I've got lots of good friends who come from Kondavu. One of my neighbors here in Australia is Dan Bolea, who is from Ravitaki, and so he and I sometimes get together and drink grog and talk about Kondavu. And he's a very good man. And so I'd like to get back to Kondavu. I'd also like to do more research in Nandronga, but I think so many places in Fiji are under-researched, and I really think it's time that Fijians across the spectrum started to do more research into this kind of thing for themselves. Now, for that to happen, it needs to be facilitated. And, the last Pacific Archaeology conference I went to, Alevuna Kaipalangi sa sengi Alevuna people of the islands here. And I think that's a real problem. And I would love to see more Pacific Islanders becoming interested in Pacific Island heritage, because I think they have a way to understand it that an outsider will never have, however long they lived in the islands. And, even if they are Matai Navasavaviti, then it's still not the same as being, from Fiji. So I'd love to see more of that. I'm always on the lookout for research students to work with me here in Australia, but looking at something to do with the Pacific. So I'd love to go to Nairai. I'd love to go to Mbatiki. I've been to Ngao, I've been to the Asia Samoala, but Nairai and Mbatiki are two places I would love to visit. I bet there are all sorts of interesting things there that the world doesn't know about yet.
Sa totoka, Reina. Mike mandona no kunay tama Nairai. What came Mbatiki? Professor Patrick Nunn is willing to go to your paradise, but before he visits Nairai and Mbatiki, he has to go to Kondavu first.
Roy, I've never been to Matanuku.
So maybe there's a disclaimer for me to share with the audience that I did not push Patrick Nunn to say about Kondavu. He wanted to go to Kondavu on his own will. So, Vinaka for drinking the Yangona Kondavu grog in Australia with Dan Bolea. So I'm sure your Talanoa sessions with Dan is going to be very, very informative, I'm sure.
Vinaka.
So nakabali besar Professor Patrick Nunn. Umandanga umaro takabali na you know the way you operate in Fiji, working with Rosalind and the team. And also one thing that touched me too was when you mentioned that you created posters. And not only the posters that are in one language, but in various other languages. So would you like to just share to the audience as to why you believe that translating this information into poster forms and having them disseminated to schools is an important task that you can pass on to our young ones?
I think posters are a very good way to communicate information, especially this kind of information, which is not confrontational. It's something you can look at if you want to, but you don't have to look at. It's not sending you a message. And I think having them in color, having them in the language you are comfortable with, is very helpful. When I first went to Bua with Sepeti Matararamba and Marioni Dhammailakemba, we visited the Tuimbua, and he is the most high status chief I had ever met in Fiji before. So I was really, really frightened, eh? But very nice man. And he said to us, yes, you can come and study the hill forts of Bua, but one condition. He said, do it properly and make sure you tell us what you found. And I said, Asenda Nalenga, not a problem, of course. So when the study was completed, we had the posters made and I took them back to him in person. And he was so happy. And he said to me, this is the first time I've ever seen anything written in the Buan language. So Vambao, Vambua, Vahindi, Vapalangi. He said it's the first time. And he was really happy with that. So I felt really good in myself that we had done what we had said we would do. And I think that's the way to go. And I would love to see the Fiji Museum be a little bit tougher on foreign researchers. There's no reason why every foreign researcher who wants to work on the history of Fiji should not be compelled to write something in a language that people can understand for a general audience. This is not top secret information. This is general information that everyone in Fiji has a right to know and should know. And I feel very strongly about that.
Professor Patrick Nunn wasemay na nanumay nambimbi sarangani tukutuku all this research data to be shared to our people. And I believe that through these educational posters and reports, and even through this kind of programs using social media is a good educational platform to inform our people, who are listening in, and inviting people like yourself, Paddy, and a few other archaeologists that we may be inviting. Professor Julie Field has been our guest since January and February, coming over to talk about the research that she did in the Singotoka Valley. So, having her coming in and now with you will definitely encourage this platform to also have other, archaeologists and anthropologists who have come over, to Fiji to share this information. I think what you said is right, that this information belongs to the people of Fiji, and it's not top secret information, but it has to be shared.
Dina, I agree with you.
Sa Vinaka vakalevu. Sa sambalam sarching na Veitalanoa, and I promised you it's going to be 1 hour. So our audience, I'm sure some of them satu kunchuk may kerker metos nga, but definitely I would like to invite you again, sometime in the future. And thank you for agreeing and informing me that if I request you, I'll give you enough notice so you can be able to prepare in advance, that we would like to have you come and share with us some of the research that you've already done in Fiji. So to end our Talanoa today, if there's anything else you'd like to share, or anyone you'd like to say Vinaka to, or any special memories that you want to share with the audience, this is your time.
Oh, Tarisi, I can't say anything else. I mean, you have been a great influence on me, and all my friends at the Fiji Museum have been a huge influence. And Sepeti Matararamba, Rosalind Kumar, people who have stayed with me for 20 years doing this kind of research, and basically giving me insights into Fijian culture and history that I would never have received otherwise. And it's strange, but I feel far more comfortable in Fiji than I do almost anywhere else in the world at the moment. And I wish in a way it was possible to be there full time. And Rosalind wishes it was possible to be there full time as well. But one day we will be back there. Navalevu, thank you so much for inviting me this evening, Tarisi. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor.
Wow. So on behalf of our audiences who are listening in and some who will be watching our replay afterwards, from all of us to you, Rosalind, and to Petra, and Rachel, as well as Warwick, Vinaka vakalevu, for such a wonderful Talanoa session we've had today. Many of us were very excited. I know Fiji was just playing New Zealand just before we came on. So all the excitement was there, and then they all logging in after that. So I think Fiji won. Carly, did Fiji win?
I think so.
Yes. So let's hope Fiji beat New Zealand.
They were singing the song and the sanganga.
Okay, so they were singing the song and the sanganga. So that's the clue. So while they were singing and the sanganga, we were talking about Moturiki. And of course, Moturiki is such a beautiful island that has given us so much rich history. As you said, Moturiki means, small, but it's not small in the way you were just describing it to us, it's that is meaning, but what it has given us is 800 BC information, or even 1200 BC information. So acknowledging our people of Luimbao and all the villages that are there in Moturiki, and acknowledging the Netambale site in which your team conducted their research. And also at this time acknowledging Sepeti Matararamba, our long-term friend who has always been there. He's still fit and strong. So if anyone who is living in Mokusoi Estate in Pacific Harbor and hearing this conversation, please tell Sepeti Mata that Professor Patrick Nunn and I say mbula to him. And hopefully when the border opens, we will definitely visit Fiji and have a cup of tea or maybe a bowl in Mokusoi Estate.
Sanjina.
Yeah. Nakavalevu sara Paddy.
Navalevu Tarisi. Lama vera tamai vale. Okay.
Sadon. Naka.
Yo, mother.
Mother manda naka. Nakavalevu sara vikim nina semuti kumai. And nero Veitalanoa ke Professor Patrick Nunn. Aunitaka ni onitalitaka na Veitalanoa medaka ni kua na nito ngwalitika na yan no Moturiki kena Veitalanoa tekitiko na vakadidike sa nakava na turangango and kormakawa na itambali baka binibinaka sa chikuber na turanga na marama na dorobo na ngonele na yan no Moturiki and nomuni suletu na ngalala wana turangango. Professor Patrick Nunn me ngolani mela kita kapa na nona vakadidike kerto na nona Timi main Fiji Museum bakatanga kina university ni deva babini minak talanga vikoi na nona Veitalanoa takabakalilai na ibola na Vanishing Islands and na buku ni Italanoa membaleti da Veitalanoa bakausibi na yanu makawaya kasatukuni ni Sanromu na yanu obuni vilevu toka serangana ken romaliwa na yanu obolau ke Moturiki. Nda maro taka vakalevu na vakadidike e mai dakava na turangango e do tali taka koe na wasea na italanoa makao. Ka wasea talanga na i tukutuku ni nona vakadidike. Me vakau na ni wasea tuka na kai wasea tiko koe ni levu na ngona erdola ko mai sor do me vakadidike e vakar do sianga ni do tandola mbeka na londra mera wasea lisumai ni italanoa. I ndola kai wasea tuka Professor Patrick Nunn bimbi ni kena do vaskar lista le tukutuku na vanua e a vakadoro ke na vakadidike beleta ke a senga na vi vakadonui me virto na toki ni vanua ke a senga do ni taka na taka kaya. So vir sar le rawata na koroi, so vir sar le rawata na karoni na koroi, so sar le rawata ni katolu ni na koroi. Ia ke makasar le rawata ya wakadava mer lista le mai kena vanua teka bukina na non vakadidike na mateni ngona. Naka vakalevu sar Professor Patrick Nunn e na nomuni ngole mai mo ni me wasea na vakadidike me baleti Moturiki ia sa tiko talanga na nona tuba me na ngole ni kandawu vakatalanga kini nanronga ka sa tiko talanga na nona tatandra me na ngande talanga ya ni kimbua ke na irone ya nenungo o na irai vat kimbatiki e sa tiko na nona tuba me na ngande talani kini. Sa kuasar ngaya na dito itakitaki na kami nakanikua maro teksar na kanga ke viti may Australia e na maro talaga ni tasema talaga ke Australia ki na wuvale ni Professor Patrick Nunn e na nona ngole me ni ko me Veitalanoa weekend e na wuku ni nona vakadidike e na waku tumo ko so italanoa so na articles beka savola wakatanga kina maramotina Rosalind Kumar ia onitaka ni na wakumai ono se ni bikem ni ngoni Moturiki ke bakau ni Vinaka muni don nong ni labi-labi. Sa dono sa vamoreani ni mote mata. Naka